Thank you everybody for coming out, and thank you for everybody who's joined us online. This is using the ArcGIS API for Python for administration. My name is Andrew Czepkowski, and I'm the lead developer of the ArcGIS API for Python, and this is my colleague.
I'm Jay Roebuck. I'm the DevOps and QA automation engineer for the Python API.
All right, we're going to dive right into this. We don't have a lot of slides, and we're going to focus on everything through actual running code, and because I think that's the best way to learn it. So as I transition over, I want you to think about something. What's blue and doesn't weigh very much? Something to think about in the future. I'll reveal the answer later. All right. So a lot of you, when you start out working with the ArcGIS API for Python, sometimes you're overwhelmed and you don't know where to start. And sometimes you say to yourself, I have no idea what I'm doing. And we're here to help. So the ArcGIS ecosystem is vast, and you can have multiple organizations, multiple servers, and you have to work with them. So I look at it as the way of the Python. And we can use the Python API to basically drive our workflows to do the administrative tasks that we need to do. Think of it like this: write it once and forget about it and just run it as you need it. The reason you would want to use the ArcGIS API for Python is a few reasons. The first one is that it's cross-platform. So it doesn't matter if you're on Windows, Linux, Mac, you can go ahead and you can use the ArcGIS API for Python. You can do it in a scripting environment. You can run it on a notebook like you see here. It doesn't really matter. It runs where you're doing your work. All right. Next, I want to talk about what we can manage. So besides managing our infrastructure, you can work with your users, content, groups, and so much more. Your individual machines, it doesn't matter. The Python API allows you to do this. And to get started, it all starts with our GIS object. And this is going to sound a little repetitive when I say it, but it starts with one simple import. From ArcGIS.gis, import GIS. We can connect to multiple different ways. So we work with almost all of the security models that you have. In this case, I'm going to instantiate a variable called GIS, and I'm going to create an anonymous connection. If I don't pass a URL in, it'll go ahead and it'll connect to ArcGIS Online. One of the most common ways that people log into their infrastructure is a method that we call built-in, or a fancy way to say username and password. So we have our GIS object, and we can just pass in a username and password, and by default, it'll go to ArcGIS Online. But I can also have it go to my enterprise by specifying in a URL with a username and password. But all our scripts, we don't want to put our credentials out there for everyone to see, for all the scripts that we're sharing. So we introduced this idea that we call profiles. And profiles are a way that we can protect our credentials and leverage our operating system's credential store and put our information in there. So to leverage them, you have to create a GIS object like we saw before. So we're going to pass in our URL, our username and password, but we add an additional parameter here called profile, and we give it a name. In this case, I'm going to call it portal profile. Now, on my local system, it'll take those three credentials that I had before, the username, password, and URL, and I can reference it only by that profile name. Now, if I were to take my script and hand it off to somebody else that didn't have that profile, they'd get a login error because those credentials don't pass along with you. But every time you run the script, wherever you've set it up, it'll automatically grab it from your operating system credential store, and you can move on. Other login methods that we support are LDAP, IWA, PKI, and a whole host of others. New at 11.5 and in ArcGIS Online, we have this idea that they've introduced called developer API keys. So how many of you are using SAML logins? All right, well, this is for you. You should really pay attention to this part. You're able to create a key that mimics your user, and you're able to do personal operations on that. So this is basically an expanded OAuth 2 method of logging in. So let's go ahead and see how we can go ahead and create this. In this example, we're using 2.4.1, which is coming out in about 2 weeks. And we're going to go ahead and connect to our GIS and create a API key. So I'm going to connect to ArcGIS Online in this case, and then I'm going to create an item. So I'm going to grab my folder where I want to store it. I'm going to set an expiration, which I need for my developer API key. In this case, it can't be more than 1 year from today's date. It expires in a year. I set some item properties, and this case, I have my application. I give it a title, and then I want it to be a personal API token. This means I'm going to be able to do admin operations by using this key. I'm going to go ahead and add the item. Next, I have to define the privileges that I want my user to have. So up here, this is every privilege that's available for an administrator, and I just copied it into a list and I passed it in. I then go ahead and register my item, and it defines it so I have this item now can have these specific privileges, or so we've scoped it so it can do these specific things. Next, we have to get our actual API token. So off our item, after we've registered our information, I provide a slot, because you can have up to 2 API keys per item, and I pass in my expiration, and this gives me back my access token. I can then take my access token and reconnect to my GIS, and I'm able to log in and see the information about who I've logged in as, and I could go through and I could use that GIS object to do all those administrative operations that I couldn't do before using scripting. Once you're finished, you can go ahead and delete it. So now that we've seen that, I want to go ahead and talk about administrating enterprise a little more and dive into some other aspects, specifically to administration. So administrating our enterprise, we can do a whole host of different topics. We can modify the UI and the UX, the feel. We can place our enterprise into read-only mode. So let's say you're migrating content and you want to make sure users don't put new content on to your enterprise. We can go ahead and say, no, this is read-only. You can't write any new content. We can update our security models. We can work with the resource files on there. We can do server management and a whole host of other things. We're going to hit some of them. And the reason we're only going to hit some of them is that this is just a broad overview of everything that you can do. You can set up collaborations, federation, license. It's just a graphic that shows a lot of the various functionality that are available off the gis.admin endpoint. Now, there are differences between enterprise and online. With enterprise, you basically have full control over everything, and you can see the difference here. So basically, you can do everything in enterprise than you can do in online, except for credits, because that concept doesn't exist in enterprise. This is one interesting endpoint that I love to point out, especially if you're using ArcGIS Online. I know this is a little tangential to what we're doing, but it's called history. And what history allows you to do, this endpoint off the admin, is it allows us to see everything that users are doing and when they did it and how they did it. So I'm going to connect to online in this case, and I'm going to say, I want to know from 4 days ago, how was my system used? And I want to get all the records, 100,000 records, and I'm going to pull them back in. So for my organization, I'm able to see that the #1 action that occurred for all my users was logging in, which makes sense. But then we can see the next one is actually updating content. So people on my organization were updating a lot of existing content. They were deleting some and then adding new. We can also see that they recycled content and they did some sharing. And it basically goes down this list. You can see everything that has occurred. Another big thing that administrators want to do is they want to know what their users have on the system. And they want to see all the content. So you want to page through it. As administrators, you basically have access to the entire catalog on your system. So we can go through using the admin endpoint. We're going to go ahead and connect to our enterprise. We're going to import also this item type enumeration. We're going to go ahead and connect, and we can loop through calling admin.content, And in this case, I'm going to look at all the file geodatabases that are on the system. Instead of printing them all out on my enterprise, I just took the first one. But this would keep going until it actually runs out of file geodatabases to go to. So you could say, give me all the feature layers that have occurred that exist on my enterprise, or give me all of whatever, web maps. And then you could do something with that, or maybe create a report on that. Another concept that's really helpful for administrators is working with webhooks. And we're going to have a demo on this a little later, but from the admin endpoint, I think it's very important. So off the gis.admin, we can go ahead and access the webhooks list, the webhooks endpoint. And we could go ahead and say list, and it would list us all the webhooks. And on this enterprise, I don't have any. In one line of code, you can create a webhook that'll send all actions that occur that are valuable, just doing admin.webhooks.create. You send it to your webhook endpoint. That webhook endpoint has to respond from the initial query to it, 200 OK, and then it'll register a webhook. You give it a name as well. So now we have our webhook. Then as we do actions, you'll be able to go ahead and then look at the responses. So in this case, I'm going to add a shapefile and delete it. So what the webhook actually responds with is an event. And this event, in this case, I'm adding, it says that the user, me, Andrew, added an operation, and then we can see, then it sent a second event to my webhook where it actually told me that I deleted that item. This is really important if one use case that we see a lot of people doing webhook usage with this is through, let's say you have critical content that you need to always be on your enterprise. And if it gets deleted, you can have a process that instantly republishes it. You can also see what users are doing at a very fine-grained level by using webhooks as well. When you have a problem, the place to go to is enterprise logs. So off your GIS admin endpoint, you can access the logs and you can look at things like properties. It should be noted that logs only last roughly 90 days by default. So if you have administrative requirements where you need to say, I need a year's worth of logs to meet some security requirement, you want to start caching your logs after every so many days. So you can query these logs out and dump them out to, in this case, a list of dictionaries, or you could save them out to a CSV file. Another task that administrators have to deal with are actually working with the ability to work with licensing and setting users up correctly for the licensing and extensions that you have. Off the admin endpoint, you can work with all licensing, see what's available on your enterprise, and you can also provision them for different users. In this case, I'm going to provision all licenses to myself, and I can go ahead and I can examine them. I can go through and I can examine my federated servers. In this case, I'm going to go ahead to the admin endpoint servers. It gives me a server manager, and then I can call validate. If I had a server that wasn't working for any reason, validate is the place to go to see why it's not doing it. It'll bring back the error message that I can't reach this server, or this is down, or there's some network issue in between there. And it's a good starting point before you go to the logs to see if something has actually broken. So let's say we want to get our hosting server and start working with that. So for my server manager, I'm going to say, give me the hosting server, and we're going to access that list and get back the first server object. Now we're going to go in and we go and then we could interrogate services and look at all this other stuff. Another major component of working with enterprises on this initial overview is that you can work with various resources that exist on there. So I can add things like JSON files and other imaging that sort of makes your enterprise feel like yours than using the default stuff. So it starts by adding it to our enterprise resources. And once you have the stuff uploaded through your enterprise resources, you can start doing your UI, UX customization. So off the gis.admin, we access our UX, and we have some default things that are set up for our enterprise. In this case, it's our demo enterprise, and we have our name. We can go ahead and we can change these descriptions and print them out, and we can see that they've changed. And we can go and we can update things like our title. We can see our default background in this case is the river violet, which is this purplish blue color. But let's say we want to modify it to something else, and we want to use the amber, the reddish and brown color. So we can set our background, change the stock image, change our title, and then we get our updated page like showing here. And once we have that all done, we can actually clone that UI UX. So once you have the look and feel of your enterprise and the way you want it to behave and look and all that, we can go to our uxmanager.clone. It returns a future object, so we call result. And then the result object returns back this UXPK package. Then we can move it to any new enterprise and just say load offline configuration, and it'll repopulate it up there. One other thing that I mentioned before was about read-only mode. Anybody who has to deal with migration from Site A and Site B, before you actually move your content over, you want to put your enterprise into read-only mode. So users know that they really can't add anything new. And then you can start migrating your content. So in this case, I'm going to do gis.admin.mode. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my read-only to true, and then pass it back into mode, and it updates my enterprise. It will take a few minutes, so I'm not doing this one live. We can go ahead and we can examine. Another way to look at content is using advanced search. And as administrators and users, this gives you complete control of the search operation over the standard gis.content.search. So let's say I want to know how many items there are of a specific type. I can use advanced search and say, hey, I want to know how many feature services are that start with have the word battle in it. And I return back 792. I can aggregate statistics and get responses back. In this case, I'm going to get back, in this one, I just wanted to sort by the average rating and descending order and get back the results. But I can do more interesting searches. So let's say you want to know how much new content was added in the last 5 days to your organization. So I'm going to create today's time and then the time back 5 days ago. Then I can just pass in those date times as timestamps into the query, and I can see that 148 new items were created in my organization for the last 5 days. The last little bit that I want to talk about before I hand it over to Jay is enabling metadata support. By default, metadata is disabled, but it's always a good idea to enable it for your users. So you do gis.admin.metadata. This gives you back your metadata manager, and you go ahead and you call enable. You can see that it is enabled, and it's set to true. Now users can add that additional layer of rich information. So I'm going to hand it over to Jay, who's going to take over for some other cool demos. All right, Jay, take it away.
Thanks, Andrew. 3. All right. All right, so I'm going to demo a little bit of user management here. I'm going to go ahead and connect to this GIS. I'm going to use that profile. I've got a demo profile here. We're going to prove that I'm connected. Let's get that going. So I am involved with my local Civil Air Patrol squadron out in Florida, and one of the things that we often have is new folks joining us. And so one of the things that I'm going to demo is adding new folks to our ArcGIS setup. So sometimes I'll get in a CSV and I'll want to go through those. So let's construct a CSV with a username, a password, first name, last name, email, description, and whether we want this user to be an admin. For this case, I'm going to go ahead and put some dummy data in here for usernames and going to generate a password. This would normally be coming in as a file, but I'm going to go ahead and load this into a pandas data frame like I could with that file. And let's look at those users that we're going to add. Great, so we've got that CSV and we've got it in a nice Python display. We've got the username, the password, first name, last name. We're ready to go. All right, so let's go ahead and iterate through these. So I'm going to just use the built-in pandas iteration. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to select a role for this user based on whether they're an admin or not. If they're an admin, we'll use org admin, that built-in role. And if they're not, we'll use org user. The same thing with our user type. We'll assign a license based on whether they're admin or not. We'll give them professional, advanced if they're an admin, otherwise we'll give them standard. So we'll pass that in. On the user manager in the GIS, we've got a create method. We'll pass in that username, password, and all the other properties. Let's run that and see how it goes. Great, so we've got 3 new users, 2 of them are admins and 1 is not. So we've created a few users. Let's add them to some groups. So groups, you guys are familiar with groups. What are they? They are ArcGIS portal and online facilities that make it easy to share relevant maps and data with certain groups of users. So in this case, I went ahead and created 2 groups, one to represent admin and one to represent standard users. Let's go ahead and query for those using the search method. So this has given us the Devon Tech Summit 25 group and the 25 admin group. I've gone ahead and made this into a dictionary so that way I can look it up by the name and use that here to iterate through the users that we've got in the data frame again. And we can assign them to the group based on whether they're admin or not. Let's go ahead and give that a try. Awesome. So we've got these new users added to their groups. Now we can easily share different data with them based on their role in the company. Next, let's revisit roles. So roles allow us to give permissions to access and manage things in our organization. Basically, we've got built-in roles that work for many situations, but in some cases we want to refine these a little bit. I've created a custom role already with some elevated user permissions, and so let's query for that and display it. So we've got that, and we'll go ahead and iterate through our new users, and if they're not an admin, we'll go ahead and assign them to the elevated user role. Let's do that now. All right, so we've done that, and it has assigned that user to true. All right, great. All right, so one of the other things that we need to do for when we have new users is assign them credits in our ArcGIS Online organization. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to this one. All right, so this is an ArcGIS Online organization that we use for testing. And so you can manage credits. One of the things that the ArcGIS Online organization has is a default limit for credit usage when you create a new user. So in this organization, it's currently 550. If we want to add additional credits to that for new users, we could go ahead and just increment that. Let's go ahead and add 50 credits to that. And let's query that again and see what is set at. Great, so we have 600 credits anytime we add a new user. What about for users who need more credits than that. So this particular user has, it's showing as -1. In this case, that is unlimited credits for a user, up to the organization's credits. For this particular user, let's say that we want to give them double the default limit. So we can then assign credits to the default limit and times 2. Let's go ahead and do that. And we should have 1,200 there. Excellent. All right. Back to you, Andrew.
All right, great, thank you. Let me switch back over. All right, so next big important thing that I've hinted upon after you use your, when I spoke about putting your portal in read-only mode, is about cloning items. And cloning items is pretty straightforward. Let's say you have an organization A, it doesn't matter if it's online or another enterprise, and want to move it to organization B. You can go ahead and you can clone it using off of the content manager. So you can do gis.content, pull in the items, and then you just pass them in as a list. But there's a problem with this way. Anybody who has to deal with disconnected environments, this won't work. It has to be able to see the destination wherever you're putting it. And this has been in the API for a long time. But coming out at 2.4.1, which is about, like I said, about 2 weeks or so, we're introducing this concept of offline content migration. And this is going to allow you to connect to your organization and perform cloning. In this case, I'm going to take a web map, and this web map consists of multiple layers. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass this in to this offline export items content. So I'm going to pass in this one web map. And this package is going to create basically everything we need to rehost it. So it's going to include all the data. It's going to include the web map, the symbology. It's all going to come along. And we can go ahead and pass it in, and it's going to create this offline, this .content export file. We can then move our file over, and we're going to use the power of imagination here and say we're going to a completely different enterprise that can't see the other one, and we're going to connect to my enterprise system. And then we just pass this file in by doing gis.content.offline and then import content and pass the file package in. It'll go in and restage all those files. And notice we only passed in just one web map, and it went through and it found all its dependencies and it moved us for us. So it makes migration really easy. The other thing that the offline content manager will do is if you have multiple web maps that are dependent on the same item, it'll figure that out and it'll only copy it once. So you won't get multiple copies of your data. It'll reuse stuff that it's already moved across. All right. So now I want to dive a little deeper into the Portal Admin API. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to connect it to my enterprise, and we can go ahead and we can start diving to the machine level things that are behind it. So I can do gis.admin on machines, and we can start looking at the things that are actually powering our portal. We can go ahead and list them out, and then we can check if they're running. So we can do machines list, we can look at some properties, we can see how the machine name is there, we can look at the admin endpoint, we can look at the various platform information. We can, for each machine we have, we can check the status and see if it's actually running. If it's working, it'll return true, which is what you want to see. If it's not working, you're going to get a message and it'll tell you why. Now that you know your machines are okay, you can start diving into things like customization of system directories through the Python API. So we can inspect the physical paths where resources are stored on the back end. So these are things that are going to be your content, your indexing, the database that actually powers enterprise itself, and the temp directory where things are temporarily stored. So we can do gis.admin.system and start diving into the directories. And for each system directory that we have, we can see where things are physically stored on our system. So on our Linux system, we have data ArcGIS users, and with our description of what everything's in there. We could then change those as needed. We can update that information to customize it. So maybe you're using file shares and all this other, all that other stuff. Additional things that are really important Sometimes with enterprise, it doesn't happen very often, but if you do a lot of adding and deleting, sometimes indexes, when you're doing your searches, get out of sync. So you can force reindexes as administrators. So we can go and take a look at our index status, and we can see how many items are actually in our database, how many groups we have, how many actual items we have within our database count. And if we know that's out of sync, we can force the reindex, and we can do a complete reindex and reindex all of the various indexes that we have. Or we can just say, hey, I know there's a problem with our search mode, so our content, because we've been adding a lot of it. So I'm just gonna say system.reindex and just say reindex the search component of it. And you can check the status, and it'll give you informative updates as it goes through, so you can see when that indexing is actually completed, so you can go and keep track of it that way. And if an issue arises, it'll also post it in the index status. Another major component of enterprise is actually the underlying federated servers with your GIS. So we can manage various federated servers by doing gis.admin.servers to give us that server endpoint, and we saw that before. So connecting to my enterprise, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get my server manager. I can list out all my servers by doing servers.list, and I have 4 for the system. But I'm gonna go ahead and I wanna check my certificates that are on there. It's probably a task that a lot of you have to do if you're administering it. See when things expire, you wanna go and you need to update them. So you can see how they're signed. In this case, it's not very exciting. I'm just using a self-signed certificate, so I definitely need to go back and update that. We can go ahead and validate the various servers, but we're gonna focus in on our hosting server in this case. We can go ahead and look at the operations that are available to us. So hosting servers provide slightly different things that you can do than a notebook server or an image server. So in this case, if you're ever unsure of what you can do, you can examine the resources that are available to you for those various servers that are out there. Just like enterprise, we can go ahead and we can access those logs, and this is gonna be your first line of defense when you have an issue with your actual server. We can do things like accessing the settings and see where the information's stored. In this case, I'm saving my max log file age is 90 days. So I bump that up. You can bump that up or bump it down. And we can go ahead and we can query that information just like we did before with enterprise. And this returns back various messaging in here. What I did is I took my messages that comes back as a dictionary, and I wanted to access the individual log messages, and I pushed it into a pandas data frame for easy reading for my thing. On servers, there's also the concept of folders. So I could say, hey, I want to create this folder, Dev Summit 2025. I just do server.services, create the folder. I can delete them. So if I'm uploading SD files, I can go ahead and create that in advance. I can go ahead and manage individual services. So we have our services manager off of services. And let's say I want to create I want to upload a ports feature service. I can say, does this exist already? And if it does, I either need to delete it and rename the service that I'm updating for something else. So, but it doesn't exist. I can list all the services that are available under a given folder. So in this case, I'm going to loop through all folders and list every service. I have quite a few on this machine, as you can see. And I can control the state. So in this example, I'm going to grab the default service that comes with everybody. It's sample service 1. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start and stop it. So the default status for the service is started, but if I need to stop it or it's hanging, maybe you have an issue with the sock, you can go ahead and you can stop your service. And then when you go and query that status, you can see it's updated from started to stopped. And then you can go ahead, restart it, And you can go and re-query the status, and you can see that everything's A-OK again. You can modify individual services, so you could modify the minimum maximum pools. Like, let's say you have 1,000 services on a single server, but they're not all being used. You can put the minimum instances of your SOCs down to 0 for those services that aren't being used, and then prioritize the ones that are used heavily on there. And this is how you would go ahead and do that. So in this example, I'm actually going to make sure that on the services that are critical to me, I have users that use KML, and I want to go ahead and I want to enable that. So from this sample service 1 service, I'm going to go ahead and look at the extension type called KML server, which just means KML, and I'm going to ensure that it's enabled. So I just say extension enabled equal to true. You could go through and you could look at all the extensions on top of that as you update it. So whether it's WFS, WMS, depending on the service, and see if they're actually available and if they're enabled or not. So we saw the logs. So I'm just going to skip ahead because I want to make sure we have time. The next part I want to talk about is monitoring server usage. And this is accessed on the individual hosting server by going to the usage endpoint. And this will allow us to actually see, we can either look at the server as a whole for statistics, or we can do fine-grained reports on individual services within our hosting server. Some of the examples of things that we can do is that we can look at the total number of requests for an entire server, or for the past week. We can look at load during a given time. Maybe you had an incident that occurred where you had very critical data and it was getting hit, and you wanted to see how I can better allocate resources to that. Or you can even look at performance over an hourly basis, as fine-grained as that. So this is accessed, like I said, off of the server.usage, and we can look at the predefined reports that come through. There's 4 by default, and we can look at or 3 by default, and you can create one. So I'm going to go ahead and, look at the report, and we can go ahead and we can, for example, we can look at the querying for the max response time. And in this format, as the data comes back, it's not very helpful, but we can use other tools to better visualize this data. So in this case, I'm going to use pandas coupled with matplotlib to look at this data. So for the last 7 days, I can look at the max response time that occurred in seconds. So on March 7th, and looks like sometime between March 5th and 6th and the 13th, that we had some response issues. Maybe we want to go ahead and dig into the logs and see what's actually happening on that day. So it's just another resource as administrators that you can go ahead and you can find this data and help you, guide you to figure out if there's a problem or not, and maybe it's a sizing issue of your instance of ArcGIS server or something like that. But let's say you didn't want to use one of the quick reports or one of the existing reports, and we wanted to do reporting on the fly. Maybe you don't know what you needed to do. So we can go ahead and do this concept that we call quick reports. And these are going to generate a report and then wipe it off the system right away, so it won't sort of clog up your reporting. And we can do it off of a specific set of metrics that are available. So things like request counts, how many requests failed, timeout times, the maximum and average response times, and then also service instances that were active. And we can just do it something as simple as usage.quick-report and give me the information for the last month on the request counts for my server. Taking that same code that I had before, leveraging both pandas and matplotlib, I can visualize that information here, and I can see the total counts for the last 7 days. So it sort of mimics that. If we looked at the previous image above, it sort of mimics the high points on the same dates and times that we saw before. So we had a lot of requests, so then services started responding slower. So what can we do to scale up our services and make them be more responsive for our users? So I'm going to hand it back to Jay for a few more wrap-up things, and then we'll take questions.
Thanks, Andrew. All right, I want to talk about notebooks a little bit. So I have this install of the latest Enterprise. We've got Notebook Server configured on it. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is automation. How can I run my Python code in a way that works well in an automated fashion? So for that, I'm going to show you, I've got this very simple notebook that doesn't really do a whole lot, but I've got some code here. As you can see, it prints out that it succeeded running this script with a timestamp. So I've got this notebook scheduled to run currently every hour. So here in the UI, you can see the task for that, where I've got it configured run hourly, and it's that ArcGIS version checker notebook. If we drill down into the details, we can see the details that this is run every hour. You can do a lot of different things with this, and one of the things that we're hearing from users is that it can be challenging when you're working in an environment with OAuth and SAML to connect with your scripts. Andrew showed one of the ways that 11.5 and online is providing to improve this workflow for you. But using notebooks, you can connect with GIS and Home, and it will use the user that sets up the task. So you can do any of the automation tasks that you need to do in an automated way using the scheduled notebooks. The other thing I wanted to demonstrate this afternoon was webhooks. So earlier today, I created this webhook that notifies with all changes that happen in the organization. I created this, This portal has a way for us to visualize these webhooks as they come through. So we've had a couple this afternoon come through. Anytime a user signs in, anytime any content is created or items are updated. In the ArcGIS API for Python, we're able to manage these webhooks as well. So let's log in. So I'm logged in here again, and we've got that webhook configured here. So let's say that you wanted to deactivate this webhook. You're able to do that here by calling the deactivate method. We can reactivate it also. In addition, you're able to create these webhooks here. So using the UI, if you create a webhook, it prompts you for a name, a type, and a URL. The create method here is going to have that exact same structure. So you would just call gis.admin.webhooks.create and pass those parameters in. This is a way for you to be able to manage that with the Python API. All right, we had a couple questions come through.
Yeah, hold on. Before we get to questions, I just want to share some resources and links that could help you out for everything that you showed. The first one is our documentation, sample, and guides. It's all available in our developers.arcgis.com/Python, and you can look at the latest on there. Also, you can look at the previous versions as well. If you have questions or issues, we highly engage with our community, and we appreciate everybody on here and everybody that's on through the web and streaming app as well. You can come right to our public GitHub page, github.com/Esri, ArcGIS-Python-API. You guys keep us going. We really appreciate any questions or feedback that you have, and we take it very seriously. If you're interested not only in this talk, I know it's still going on, but you want to look at what we've done in the past with notebooks, samples, guides, you can go and look at our past conferences talks also on that GitHub page. You just have to look at the conference_talks branch, And you can go ahead and go to that, and you can download the notebooks that we use today, which will probably be put up in about 2 weeks or so, as well as previous conferences as well. It's a great learning resource, and it's a great way to see what's going on, and a refresher of what you learned here today. Because I know we put a lot up, and we did that on purpose. Because administration isn't just one little thing. It's a very large ecosystem, and we just hope we gave you some ideas on where you can start to solve your problems or better manage your enterprise. So before we get to questions, please share your feedback in the app, and we greatly appreciate that. If I can go to the next slide. So I had one question for all of you. So what's blue and doesn't weigh very much? Does anybody have any ideas? All right. Light blue? Ah. Thank you. All right. Now we'll open it up for all of you. And, thank you once again. I'd like to start. Jay, do you want to say anything on there?
Sure. One question we've got here from Jeremiah. Do those offline content migrations only work with hosted data?
So the offline content migrations do not just work with hosted data, but right now, it will re-host it as a hosted data. So it'll pull your reference data in. It doesn't grab your data store at this time. It's something we're looking at for a future enhancement down the road. So think of this as V1 of that tool.
Right, here's another good one.
Does anybody have any questions in the audience? Yes, sir.
Offline data export. You said that's coming in with the Python API 2.4.1.
Yeah, so the question was the offline cloning, is that coming in for version 2.4.1? And the answer is yes, it is coming with version 2.4.1, which is right down the road. We've tested it for 11.0 and beyond. So it doesn't mean it might work for other things, but it's Wild West for you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there a size limit to what that can handle?
Can you be more specific on the size limit before? Yeah, so the question is about cloning items, large feature layers with multiple attachments with clone items. So the only limitation that you would incur is if the long drawn-out answer is that it should work. There are instances where things can your destination server can return 500 errors. Sometimes it gets overwhelmed, but that comes down to more of a resourcing size on the back end as you migrate content. It should be able to handle a lot of it. If you're experiencing any issues in terms of clone item, please stop by the booth after this and either speak to myself, Jay, or one of our other members that are there, like Noah, and we can dive into your specific case if you're experiencing problems. Yes, ma'am.
Related to the cloning, because moving from stage
Okay.
preserve the item ID?
Yeah, so the question is moving from stage to test to production, can you preserve item IDs when you clone? The answer is yes, if it's enterprise. If it's online, we cannot preserve item IDs. I know I went over there. Yes, ma'am.
Incorporated disaster recovery strategies in the Python?
The question is about disaster recovery pipelines for using the ArcGIS API for Python. We have, you can take advantage of the backup and restore operations that exist for both portal and servers. So you can do that. You could schedule that and make a pipeline to do that. Thank you. Do you want?
Yeah, I could see the new offline cloning stuff being really useful for that as well.
Yes, I mean you could do that as well for backing up critical items as well. Would you like to do an online question before you go?
Sure, yeah. So This question from Michael, is the Python API restricted to specific versions of Enterprise? I have to use an older version, Enterprise 11.3, for example. So I think the answer there is Enterprise has a version of the Python API that is built into it for those environments, but the newer versions of the Python API support connecting to older versions of Enterprise. And you can use standalone environments and things like that. And then you can use newer versions of Pro to connect to it still. So that's kind of the. Do you want to elaborate on that?
No, you hit it on the head, and that's great. Yeah, we do work with older versions. We do work with the latest version, and that's one of the greatest things about the Python API. It is, if you are using a very old version, it is always best to work with the older version. So like a 10.9.1, a 10.8, or something like that. You probably want to go back to an older version because it goes back to testing. When things deprecate, we don't go back and retest every version for it. So yeah, yes, sir. So if I were to paraphrase what you're saying, you're asking about the developer environments that we're using for this demo? Is that? Yeah. Yeah. How do you get the notebook on there? Well, you have to install a notebook server and register it with your enterprise in order to have it come up. So it's another install on top. It's a companion server, I guess is one way you could describe it. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Can you make any recommendations related to setting up your Python scripts for API keys? I feel like there should be some best practices around maybe. You kind of touched on it a little bit.
Yeah.
Presentation about kind of calling that, encrypted password key that you talked a little bit more about best practices.
Yeah, so for API keys, there's a few things that I would recommend in general. One, API keys, you should cycle them regularly. So the max lifetime for any API developer key is 1 year. So at minimum, it should be that. If you know there's a problem, you invalidate it instantly. You have the ability to do that. You can go and say, this is a new one, and then regenerate a new set of keys. If you have the ability, for any scripts that you have, you can have a maximum of 2 API keys for one API, item. So if you could cycle them at a shorter period than a year, that's always, like, even if it was just odd even weeks, I'm using this one this week, that one that week, and have them cycle. Let's see, trying to think of other best. The other thing is, the way I showed this on here, it's scoped by permissions. You can also scope your API keys to only work with specific items. So if you need to update one feature layer and work with one app, then make an API key just to do those 2 things or that one thing, and tighten it down to the smallest set of permissions that you possibly need. And that's going to protect you and see what's going on. And you can also go and you can look at how it's being used as well. So you can take advantage of the history, those logs, the usage reports, and see who's accessing this content and how it's being accessed. And if you see an IP that you don't recognize, that's coming in, you just get rid of that key and start over, and then you have to figure out how somebody penetrated your security. Yeah. Any other questions?
Got one here.
Sure.
We can cover it.
Online.
Yeah. Is there a script that can be used to find orphaned items and properly delete them? We have many orphaned items, and search index never equals even after a reindex.
Yeah, so orphan items are actually a bigger problem than reindexing at times. They can be caused by also content database errors or something that didn't delete properly in the content folder. Excuse me. There's some new tools coming at 11.5. There's a that are going to help identify where those problems are. There's so you're going to be able to leverage that. It doesn't help if you have an existing enterprise, obviously. And then the second thing I'd recommend is reach out to Esri support if you have multiple items that aren't just syncing up and ghost items. So, anything else? Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you all for attending and sticking around. I hope you have a wonderful conference. On behalf of myself, Andrew, and Jay, we really thank you for coming out. Thank you.
Please come see us at the booth if you have any other questions.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you.